A warm welcome to our State of Mind Experiences podcast. Today topics is trauma. In the first part, we will focus on the generic understanding of this and how we can learn from it in our everyday life. In the second part, we will focus on a more professional take on this. My name is Elizabeth. I'm the founder and director of European Welfare Association, and I'm joined by my wonderful guests, Isabella and Karel. Over to you, ladies.
All right. Hello, my name is Isabella Robinson, and I'm psychoanalytical psychotherapist, practitioner for over 15 years in Birmingham area, and I'm foster mum.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Karel, and I'm a trauma-informed practitioner with Barnardo's, and my background's in social work and education.
Amazing. I feel like I've got a lot of experienced ladies in the room. So thank you so much for coming and joining us today. Let me start from asking you a question. If we were to define what trauma actually is and a basic understanding, how would you define that?
Trauma is when you think or you realistically exposed for losing your health or losing your life. So this is different for children and different for adults. Adults have self-regulation, which is completely different package of trauma. If they're going through, children having much more intense the trauma experience.
Okay, thank you. And Karel?
Yeah, I always find it really interesting, most recently, for me to think and to explain to other people of trauma as something that you've perceived to be life-threatening or dangerous. And I think that how we perceive it is so individualised then, because I think often we think of trauma as being these really terrible things. Mm-hmm. And if we haven't experienced these really terrible things, therefore what we've experienced isn't traumatic. But actually we know, mm-hmm. as Isabella's touched on, how different groups can feel it based on adults' development or child development, but we also know culturally and where we might live and the experiences that we might come into contact with in the environment can also have us feeling or experiencing trauma at different stages of our lives. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to me that it's how somebody perceives it as well is a really
Absolutely.
Good point.
Yeah, we will go deeper into it later on this podcast, but how much do we actually know about trauma as human beings, would you say?
Again, I think because we've boxed trauma into these areas where it has to be this significant event, and we know that, right? We know there's different types of trauma, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in this podcast, but often it's boxed into this really extreme mm-hmm. area. And I think actually, how much do we know about the other types of trauma, the ones that aren't things surrounding, I don't know, let's say racism or slavery, genocide, war, torture, that actually on that more personal base, the trauma that occurs within relationships, I don't think we know a lot about that actually, and I think it's a really good point here in this podcast that we have an opportunity to share some of that information around trauma that occurs within relationships.
Yeah, definitely. And if you were to give an advice to an average person, how can that person distinguish between an isolated single incident of trauma compared to a complex trauma? What advice would you give?
It's very complicated and very subjective.
Okay. You're not making it any easier. Sorry.
Very true.
Very dependent on details, on circumstances, on environment, on personality of certain person or child. So it's very hard to say.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so in terms of, I guess, just for your listeners, thinking about what type of examples might we think about then in the context of relationships, those things might be experiencing as a victim or survivor of domestic violence, or where children witness domestic violence. It can be a range of parental separation where that's not been a positive split and there might be some conflict. It can be all the different types of abuse that we know take place within the context of relationships, one person to another. And a range, as Isabella said, can be so subjective, but a range of experiences that do occur where there's people involved. These aren't one-off incidents. These sometimes in the context of relationships, that complex trauma goes on for a significant amount of time. And so that's what obviously continues to impact the person who's experiencing that.
I wanted sort of, dwell on that a bit more because what I'm really interested in is from your point of view as women as professionals as well, what's the role of the community in our understanding of trauma or how it played out around what you've mentioned, perhaps generations? Maybe you could offer some insight into the role of community and understanding or lack of understanding of trauma for that matter.
Talking about community straight away, I'm thinking about cultural needs and patterns, and as we are Polish or jointly Polish citizens as well, we know how hard was the cultural trauma after Second World War. It was full of hard experience because Second World War done a lot of damages, not only structure of nation as a physical things like houses or schools were damaged, but the like human brain main structure of behavior and how they were building another generations based on this, because they saying it was 100% trauma cover in Polish minds, in all of the Polish citizens after Second World War. And what does it mean? Everyone, every Polish citizen was experiencing seeing someone dying or lost someone close family friend. So based on this, the frustration and emotional feedback, it was very, very hard. And based on this again, in the 50s, straight away we had a communist government started their own demands and terms, conditions, and all of the structure, which was completely different than Polish citizens wanted, really.
Of course, it was very oppressive, as we all know. So that continued. So understanding this now far more than I did perhaps 10, 15 years ago, that we actually, so what you're saying, we actually carry that multi-generational trauma in our DNA. What is the science telling us about understanding of multi-generational trauma? Is it like 7 generations? Is
yes,
that something? Yeah.
So there's lots of research in terms of what you're both talking about here around that transmission of trauma from generation to generation. And I think you mentioned there that biological, genetical, and Isabella was talking about a moment ago, the environmental and political context. But the research shows us that we're not talking about, just to be super clear here, bad parents who have passed on, terrible things to children. We're talking about experiences that occur for groups of people that get shared generationally because of the group that they belong to. So that collective group that belongs to, and Isabella's touched on the Polish community, and we can look at that in a range of other communities where they experience by default, by being a member of that community, the trauma that has been passed down, and it can be biological. So there's lots of research around big term, science term known as epigenetics, and the trauma transmission through genetically. But there's lots of research as well around the impact on children generations later still feeling the physical impacts that their grandparents may have experienced during war or torture or famine. And so it really is a case of, the groups and collectives and communities we're a part of can experience trauma, even if they were never there. So you mentioned post-war, and even if we've got children today that were never in that time, they might still be feeling the physical and you touched on neuroscience and the brain impacts of that trauma.
So things that trigger us without us realizing that we've been triggered. But, you know, part of me thinks about like, there's obviously an awful lot and sadly still happening in different parts of the world, as we know, which is devastating. But how can we break that cycle of trauma, multi-generational trauma? So what's the hope? What are the practical things we could be doing as individuals to actually release that trauma from our bodies and start to live a happy life, healthy life?
I think it really starts with conversations like this. I think it's awareness. I really do think it is. I think, spreading that awareness first and foremost, and where we can very early on, teaching children to understand their brain and body as one whole. And you touched on regulation, so that learning how to emotionally regulate when we're feeling stressed. But I think there's a lot in community healing. And I think when communities have that knowledge of trauma, and then they can create their own culturally sensitive ways for healing and what looks right for them in the context that they're in, I think that's powerful as well.
It is. And I'm thinking about what is the most, the hardest borders for everyone, especially for children, is our own cultural borders. It's just like, personally, I can see myself as a citizen of the world, right? Instead of being Polish, British, or I don't know, I used to live in America, in Africa, so I could say I'm just a person, I'm a human being.
Right.
That's the most important, the awareness, as you mentioned, the knowledge about we are here to try understand each other and have good intentions. The most important. And everything will be easier after.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, which is, you know, which when you think about how the society is polarized and divided, it's incredibly difficult. So what you alert to in terms of the cultural biases, which we all have, how do we break those stereotypes? How do we actually create opportunities for all of us to break those barriers and actually be trauma ready, I guess. In terms of what I would like to ask you about from also your personal experiences as foster parents, because let's focus on children. I love the comment that you've made that, you know, it starts from educating children about how our brain works. I think it's so incredibly important that, you know, unless we create healthy brains, we can't have healthy human beings. So what can we do if we happen to be parents? Let's talk about us as parents. What can we do for our children and by default for ourselves to actually help them to be healthy human beings?
Oh, and this has got me thinking about a recent situation at home with my children.
Go on.
And even with the knowledge that I have, I think it goes back to the point we made earlier around awareness, and it starts with ourselves. I thought I had this, what's known as a window of tolerance. I thought I had quite a large window and that I was very much aware of my triggers. Until very recently, during the summer holidays, my children have been mummy in me quite a lot. And I suddenly felt really frustrated and overwhelmed. And I wasn't aware of it. But I started to note by the end of the evening how I was responding to one of my children. So before he'd even said what he had said, he said the word mummy and my whole body just, and I sighed, yes, you know. And so I realized that very quickly by the end of the day, that this is triggering me, I'm overwhelmed. And that's the key, because it's not to shame or blame parents, right?
No.
The key is to start with, what are your tolerance levels? What are some of the things in that parenting relationship? The idea that we just birth children and we go off and we do this thing and we know what to do, and it is not always true. And you touched on earlier, triggers can come from anywhere when we're least expecting them or be unaware of them. And I think just really starting to learn ourselves. How do we respond in moments of stress? What's happening in that time? How do we repair if we have caused a fracture in a relationship by not responding well to our children? That for me has been a real key thing as a parent, because then you start to see your children then model that same model. So, Mummy, I can already see you frustrated, and immediately I think, oh yeah, I am. I my body is showing. I'm already frustrated. So actually, so it's starting to increase their emotional vocabulary, increase that in terms of, and when I feel frustrated, sometimes I need to be left alone, or when I feel stressed, I need a cuddle. Whatever that is, it's starting that language. But again, that comes with a cultural context, because if our generational trauma or context has been, we don't express emotions in that way. And I'm the adult, you're the child, and that's the transaction we have. That can be really difficult to start to break, because it can feel really strange as a parent when you're the one breaking that generational trauma. And so,
does take a lot of confidence as well, doesn't it? But also the ability of showing our children the vulnerabilities that we've got as parents. I think that is incredibly difficult, must be, you know, like, how do I actually show my children that I'm not this perfect mum that's always going to be there? So how do I teach my children to acknowledge these vulnerabilities and dealing with them? And as a foster parent, that's like, do you want to dwell on that? Because you've got so much experience. Right. Where do you start?
Is listening and observing. The two main things which we need to do. Because I remember, it used to be a certain. Let's say someone is coming to us, a child is coming to us with a picture and saying, Mum, what do you think about this? Do you like it or not? And the first, I would say 30 years ago, we've been taught to say, oh, it's lovely, right? And now it's more like when a child is coming to you saying, is a picture nice for your mum? I would say, what do you think? What is your opinion about this? Asking child, so it's listening and observing, more introducing ourselves to the child and respond, so the child will feel listened to and respect, and that you've got good intention, you've got time. Time is the key as well. Because it's so hard recently with all of the modern media, dopamine technology, I would say. So it's listening and observing that the most important, which comes with time and respect.
Before I move more into the children's trauma, if I was to ask you, again, some practical tips for us as adults when we discover that actually perhaps we do have a problem, that perhaps, what was causing some issues in my life was based on that trauma. How can I help myself? What can I do? What would you say are the ways forward for an adult person who discovered that, there are some issues that need addressing?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of things nowadays you can do. Professional support, definitely. I'm not a big fan of pharmacotherapy, but sometimes helps just to change the perspective for the first moment of therapy, talking therapies. So it's going to professionals, ask for help at the GP, at the whoever is available around you. For yourself, it's a really tricky question. Again, the best is looking after ourselves, and as much as we, again, going back to being Polish and ashamed to do with being selfish, because this was something which many people didn't understand. The selfishness is like this is 100% of this, and 50% is here. So if we under self-loving is up to from 1 to 50%, sorry, and from 50% to 100 is over. So it's nice for us, but not nice for environment. When the first part is not nice for us, but nice for environment, and we need to be oscillate around the middle. So we try to be good with ourselves and try to.
So being kind to yourself. So
The most important, I think.
So how can that be achieved? What would you say is like? What does it mean to be kind to
So
oneself?
I think some of the things are, and I think we've touched on this around self-awareness, developing that. It's not it's a journey. It's not an end goal. You don't just become self-aware. There are things that happen to me every day where I go, oh, I didn't know that about myself. And I'm still learning. So I think the thing is finding what's known as grounding techniques or exercises that work for you. So that can be breathing related. So it can be things like we teach around the 5-finger breathing. So it's inhaling as you trace your thumb, exhaling, and just continuing to do that. For lots of people, there was a warning. I know that focus breathing can be quite triggering and feel really overwhelming. So if that doesn't work for you, it can be a range of different things. I like to make sure I'm grounded, so my feet are firmly on the ground. And I'm a talker, so I like to, Dr. Dan Siegel says, naming it is taming it. So I like to name it. Corral, you're feeling really overwhelmed right now because the way that person looked at you today in the playground didn't make you feel very good, and the tone they use, but it's not a you problem, and it might not even be, and just talk myself through it. I really find that really helpful and useful, and naming that emotion. Okay, so you're feeling this, and this is where you're feeling it, and I go straight to that bodily response. I'm feeling like a knot in my tummy. I'm feeling a headache coming on. All of those things are really useful, but I think the first and foremost, the steps are always really to think about your physical, your emotional, and your sensory. So it might be, are you hungry? Are you dehydrated? Let's start with that physical input first. And then think about the emotion, and then the sensory stuff, you know. Is it too loud in here? Is it too bright? Maybe you need to be somewhere quiet and calm. So yeah, going through some of those things. But again, it really does come down to you starting to become aware of your brain and body and what's happening in those moments, which it's a journey. It really is a journey. Yeah.
So it's having the resilience, but also the power of self-regulation, as we call it, isn't it? Which might sound easy, but as we know, it's not. But knowing how to do it, that's great. And thank you so much for sharing those practical things that we can do. Now, I wanted to talk a bit more about what are the potential impacts of trauma and what we call adverse childhood experiences, commonly known as ACEs. If you could just tell us a bit more about how might trauma show up differently in children's physical health issues or versus their behaviour. What would you say, you know, what we should be looking for when we talk to children?
Some changes, I believe, because every child is different, and if the child presents some different behavior, suddenly is something that the key, the trigger to think, to follow up and check if the child is all right, or is just like hormonal jump or whatever we call this. The changes in behavior.
And I think also, Isabel's absolutely right, changes. So that's hoping we know our children as well as we think we do. And for many of us, we'll feel confident in that and not necessarily always spot the change as quickly as other people might spot it. So there's no shame or blame if you don't spot it straight away. But I also think it's around how they respond outside of normal day-to-day responses. So it's a change in behaviour, but equally, how are they responding to stressful situations? Are they normally quite managing quite well and now they're not? Or equally the opposite, do they normally not manage very well but are seemingly masking or presenting as though they're fine. And so I think Isabel's absolutely right. Really getting to know how your children, young people, whether they're your children or you're working with children, young people, how they respond to different stressors and scenarios and changes of environment can be really telling. Equally, our biggest slogan at Barnardo's is behaviour is communication, and that's no matter the behaviour. So we know children are often behaving in ways where they're communicating something, an unmet need. So it might be a need for connection, or it might be something more severe, that there's something taking place for them that needs safeguarding input, for instance. But often, when my toddler is stressed or distressed over a toy, whilst it seems very small, for him it's huge, right? And so it's understanding the child's age and stage through those emotions as well. So often adolescents might not be screaming on the floor like a toddler, so they'll be showing that emotion very differently. So really getting to know the children and young people.
Which makes me think, as adults, how much do we know about the children development?
Right.
Were we taught that at school? I can't possibly remember that. That was a long time ago. But do you think there should be something done about, actually, for us adults to understand our own children and other children for that matter better, that we need to, something that you've already touched upon, that education is so incredibly important, isn't it? So what is it that we're looking for in the behaviour of our children that should kind of get us thinking about, okay, there's something perhaps not quite right. How can I support that child to regulate themselves? Or if the child is not communicating or hiding or goes into withdrawal, what are the perhaps psychological impacts of a child that we as parents or as adults can miss? Do you think? What are the things that we should be really mindful of as adults and as parents?
The development stages, they are very important to know, because many people, many mothers, they can't recognize the changes. They're very surprised and they're blaming themselves as well, because they're not aware of something is regular, quite normal. So it's quite, I would even say, harmful if they don't know, if parents don't know the development stages. So definitely it's worth to talk about this.
And I think it's a really good point, Isabella, that you've mentioned that we keep saying developmental stages, not ages, because children won't sit nicely in those age-related boxes in terms of emotional regulation. When we think about, we've already touched on the Polish community and the variety of different generational, external experiences they might have been exposed to in a traumatic way. We can't expect, because somebody's 12, they should fit neatly into that developmental stage, because if there has been brain disruption in their developmental stage, they might not be acting the way we think they should be acting in terms of regulation and behaviour and so forth. So I think developmental stages are brilliant, but I think the key thing for all of us as adults, as parents, is just be curious. What's this saying to me in this moment? How is it making me feel? Is that changing my response? If so, what's happening here? What's the dynamic? Because whatever we do will either increase or I guess almost like firefight and shut down the child. And so always just, behaviour is communication. That's how children, young people and adults communicate.
Even if we see that behaviour as challenging, as we very often hear from educational settings.
Absolutely.
Can you say that our behaviour is challenging? Because it
challenges us.
Right.
It's a behaviour that challenges or triggers us. And I think when we take accountability for it, it leaves us then being still curious about the child and what the needs are there. Whereas if we go, that behaviour is challenging, that behaviour is not good, that behaviour is problematic, we place the responsibility on the child, and then we start to get in that space where we can adultify children very quickly, especially those pre-teens, adolescent ages. But you're 13 now, you should be able to do that. But you shouldn't be, you should know better. And when we do that, that becomes very problematic for the child's development. And so we really have to remain curious. And if we take responsibility, this behaviour is a problem for me. it leaves us that space to still see the child as the innocent, vulnerable person that they are.
I love that, Carol. I really do. You know, let's just stop doing the blaming game.
Yes.
You know, and understanding the trauma and the mind is so incredibly important. That takes us very, very nicely. Well, this is almost like we can close the first part of this conversation. So thank you so much for all the thoughts on that. It's been incredible. In the second part, we will move into more professional approach in terms of working as professionals, what we can do to support the children, but also the families. So thank you. If any of those things that we've discussed today around trauma interested you, or you would like to find a bit more about it, or you want to know where to seek additional help, please check the description under this video and get in touch with us, and we will be happy to have a conversation with you.